Thank you very much for joining us today, the second day of the 14th Annual Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center Conference. We are truly privileged and honored to have all of you with us. This has been one of our most successful conferences, and this is due to the amazing work of an amazing team of individuals and units at the University of Montana and beyond. First and foremost, let me recognize some of them very quickly. Of course, my colleagues at Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center, Dr. Ardi Kia and Professor Samir Bitar. Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center under the directorship of Dr. Abe Kim. My good friend, Bob Seidenschwartz, the president of Montana World Affairs Council, but also several other units and departments on campus. Department of History, Department of Modern and Classical Languages, Russian Studies Program, Women's Studies Program. They have all come together to make this conference a great success. And tonight, we are for a treat. We have with us the senior senator from the great state of Montana with us. And without any further description or analysis of this conference so far, which has been a great success, I want to ask my very close friend and colleague, Don Loranger, who has been with us throughout this process, to help us introduce Senator Tester. It is thanks to his efforts that Senator Tester is with us. And Senator, we are truly honored and privileged to have you with us. So with no further ado, please welcome Don Loranger.
Thank you, Dr. Kia. One of 100, that's the way my wife describes our keynote speaker. I was looking forward to the possible opportunity that I was going to be able to also acknowledge one of 1,000,000. And one of 1,000,000 is Charlotte Tester, who's home in Big Sandy with the kids, and I think probably running the tractor today and tomorrow. And so she's not able to be with us, but I know you will convey to her the appreciation and love for all she does for our state and our country when you go home, Senator. It's pretty fitting when I sit here as a Grizzly graduate who not long after graduation got to actually sit down in Washington, D.C. and visit with Senator Mike Mansfield. And there's lots of things we could talk for hours about all the wonderful things that Senator Mansfield did for our state and our nation. But one of the things he did, and it's so fitting because we're at the intellectual hub, if you will, of Mike Mansfield. He was from Butte, but went to school here, taught here. And one of the hallmarks of Senator Mansfield is that he's one of those people that went to Washington, and Washington didn't change him. The same Mike Mansfield came back home that went to Washington to represent us. And the speaker that is now our senior senator from the state of Montana, in his second term that we're going to hear tonight, has that same characteristic. He is the same John Tester that went into office as a U.S. Senator. He's the same guy that today that he was then. He is a senator that demonstrates great courage and great knowledge. We're talking about some very tough subjects in this seminar here the last few days, and we'll talk about some of them tonight. And I listened to a lot of his staff talk about how hard he worked to understand some pivotal issues like Iran, for example, how hard he worked to really sort out how we should vote in a very controversial issue. So I admire that. I also admire the fact that he's just an honest, decent human being and a great friend. So it's a real pleasure for me to be able to introduce a band teacher, a dirt farmer, and our senior United States Senator, one-to-one.
Thank you. You don't need to do that. Well, thank you, Don Loringer. I was kind of getting used to what you were talking, so I was just going to let you. How the hell does this work? Yeah, it's all right. We'll make it work. Will it go up at all? Yeah, get a bigger hammer. Get a bigger hammer.
Oh.
Oh, well, look at that. Caramba. Well, thank you. No, I was getting really, I was kind of liking what you were saying, Don, and I was hoping you'd keep it up for a while. I've got to be honest with all of you before I get into my prepared remarks. This senior senator stuff's kind of a new gig for me since Max became the ambassador to China. And whenever you use the word senior, I think of Robert Byrd and I think of Patrick Leahy, and I don't think I'm quite that old, but I walk about like they do, no. But it is good to be here, and thank you, Don, for that kind of introduction, and thank you for having me here. And it is great to be here with everyone with the 14th Annual Central and Southwest Asian Studies International Conference, and I'm very, very happy that this has been a successful conference. It is certainly very important, the issues that you're bringing up. It is an honor to be here to give you my perspective as a U.S. Senator on how foreign policy decisions are being made in Washington these days and how they impact each and every one of us in this room. And it is a true honor to speak at the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center. Senator Mansfield was a true statesman, a diplomat whose view of the world was both wise and brilliant. He led our state, he led our nation, and our world proudly. He strongly believed that war was a means of last resort and that politics ended at our water's edge. His words ring truer today than ever before. We must never again enter, and this is a quote, we must never again enter any war where our security is not at stake. We must be aware of our inability of the world's big daddy, the world's policeman. We cannot be the world's policeman. I think if we've learned anything over the last 15 years, the statement of Mansfield 30, 40, 50 years ago is as true then as it is today, or as true today as it was then. And is an example to me every day as I make decisions of global importance. And let me start by saying if Mike Mansfield was alive today, he would be incredibly disappointed with the environment in Congress. Congress is a mess, and you guys know as well as I know it's not fulfilling its proper constitutional role right now, especially when it comes to foreign policy. Whether it's flexing our military muscles at Russia, closing the prisoner detention center at Guantanamo Bay, or slapping harsh sanctions on a rogue North Korea, the decisions of international consequence have become so highly political that it is eroding America's global power and putting our democracy and our national security at risk. Just listen to the Republican Party presumptive nominee for president. Last week, Mr. Trump was asked who he consults on for foreign policy matters. And he said, and this again is a quote, "I'm speaking with myself, number one, because I have a very good brain. My primary consultant is myself, and I have a good instinct on this stuff." Now, this is a terrifying answer, but it's not very different from the attitudes that you see in Congress today. And it's really what's wrong with Congress right now. There are far too many political leaders who refuse to listen to unbiased sources before making decisions of global impact. After 9 years in the Senate, I have come to realize that there is one main reason for this: politics. Too many folks view foreign policy decisions through the political lens. No matter what the facts they are presented with, they simply oppose or support the idea based on which party offered it up. These foreign policy decisions make news not for their wisdom, but because they provide a simpler worldview, one that's easier to explain in a 2-minute TV story than taking time to grasp the full picture. But let me tell you that foreign policy decisions are always more complicated than a soundbite. This became very clear about a year ago when 47 senators, led by the junior senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, wrote a letter to the leaders of Iran while the president was negotiating the nuclear agreement. The letter starts off by saying, and I quote, "It has come to our attention while observing your nuclear negotiations with our government that you may not fully understand our constitutional system." Now, at a time when Iran was just a few months away from developing a nuclear weapon, that letter was a shameful political stunt that had no purpose except to publicly embarrass the President of the United States. Furthermore, Senator Cotton made no qualms about his support for going to war with Iran, which really speaks volumes about his true intentions here. And while some of these senators may simply be clueless when it comes to the understanding the importance of America has in leading the world, what is shocking to me is that some of the folks who signed this letter knew better. What these 47 senators did was undermine the power of the United States and try to bring negotiations to a halt. The same folks who proudly beat their chests and say America is the most powerful force in the world sent a letter conveying weakness and division to our enemies and to our allies. Many senators, including myself, privately voiced our concerns over the details of the Iran negotiations with the administration. But rather than work constructively, the folks who signed this letter took direct aim at publicly derailing the ongoing negotiations between the P5+1 and Iran. Senators could have chosen other paths to express their concerns and could have done so in a more meaningful way, whether it was through hearings, letters, personal meetings with administrative officials. But instead, the decision to send this letter told the world that the United States isn't united. Nearly a majority of the Senate doesn't take foreign policy or diplomacy seriously. And it told the American people that these senators have little regard for the separation of powers. I took a different approach to these negotiations. As soon as the final nuclear agreement with Iran was announced, I began reading it. It was only 100 pages long, but it wasn't very easy reading. For example, page 28, section 42, consistent with the activities in the enrichment R&D plan, Iran will maintain the cascade infrastructure for testing of single centrifuges and small and intermediate cascades into R&D lines. You had to read it multiple times, needless to say. It's rather dry, and it took a while to plow through. And that is why I was surprised to see so many of my colleagues issue statements opposing the deal before the ink was even dry. I remember I was in my car when the president announced the deal had been struck. It was just a skosh before 7 a.m. in the morning. By 7:03, some of my colleagues had already issued statements opposing the deal. The deal could have contained everything they ever wanted, but they let partisan politics cloud their judgment. It was clear they never even read it before passing that judgment. But the deal demanded a more meaningful, thoughtful process from the United States Senate. The deal also demanded transparency, and for that reason I posted the entire agreement on my website, and I asked the people of Montana for their comments. And why? Because in order to gain a better understanding of this deal and its implementation, I need to hear from Montanans. I also fired off questions to the administration and consulted with the world's leading negotiators. I attended classified briefings with military leaders and asked them if the agreement would help keep our nation safer. I sat down with Energy Secretary Ernie Moniz to ask him if the agreement would truly ensure the detection of nuclear materials and the dismantling of Iran's nuclear program. I spoke with Treasury Jack Lew, Treasury Secretary. I asked him if lifting the sanctions on Iran would put America at further risk. I met face-to-face with Israeli Ambassador Ron Dermer and representatives from AIPAC who opposed the agreement, and asked them about how this agreement would impact Israel, a longtime critical ally of ours. And after meeting with over 20 experts, collecting feedback from hundreds of Montanans, some pro, some con, and then spending an entire month educating myself on what was actually in the agreement, I came to the conclusion this agreement was the only option at that time to keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. I believed then and still believe that the United States has an obligation to its citizens to give diplomacy a chance to work. If it doesn't, if Iran violates this agreement, we can and will hold them accountable using any means necessary, because we all know that Iran is not the most trustworthy outfit in the world. But it's clear to me that this agreement isn't built on trust. It's built on a foundation of extensive verification, intrusive inspections, and aggressive monitoring. It relies upon our military and our intelligence experts to keep a hawk eye on Iran. And it does not rule out military force if necessary. In the words of my granddaughter, Keely Kina, why would somebody choose war first? By the way, she was 10 years old when she said that. After watching thousands of men and women return home from a failed war in Iraq, I knew I wasn't ready to ask them to suit up one more time. If Iraq should have taught us anything, is that we must not politicize these important foreign policy decisions. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that we learned much from that war. At least you would know it by looking at some of the positions of my fellow colleagues. Right now, there are still far too many who want to involve U.S. troops in another regional conflict soon. They're quick to rush to judgment and quick to commit our troops without a long-term plan, but slow to consult with experts and slow to consider the costs of war. The war in Iraq cost this nation hundreds of billions in taxpayer dollars. Some have even estimated it at $1 trillion. This all went straight to our debt. But the human toll was even more devastating. 4,496 lives have been lost, and hundreds of thousands of other lives have been dramatically changed because of injury, both seen and unseen, and their lives will never be the same. The Iraq War was justified to Americans under false pretenses, and it launched us into a decade-long fight with no exit strategy or plan, a fight that we're still dealing with today. Back in 2003, had Congress paused for a moment, not rushed to judgment, got good information, our nation probably would be in a significantly different place than it is today. We would certainly have a better handle on our debt and deficit, and we'd have fewer folks battling the injuries of war. And we'd be facing a different picture in the Middle East. And that is why these foreign policy decisions are so critically important. Whether it's properly vetting Syrian refugees or coming up with a plan to counter the ISIS threat abroad and at home, these issues have great impact on our daily lives. Sure, they may feel 6,000 miles away, but they directly impact you. For every dollar we spent on fighting international conflicts, it's $1 that's taken away from making college more affordable, making health care more accessible, or ironically, veterans better cared for. These decisions have global consequence and local impact. They are not made in a vacuum or in isolation. They indeed do matter. And that's why I'm pleased to be here today. You have taken an interest in something bigger than yourself. You're committing yourself to a broader understanding of our world and to an open mind and common sense, which is rarely exhibited in the United States Senate or on the campaign trail. Please don't lose that. We need more people who understand what's going on in the world, exhibiting the values of Mike Mansfield. Thank you for having me here today, and good luck with the rest of your conference. I certainly will take some questions. I will tell you this, I do not consider myself an expert in foreign affairs. As I tell folks, I don't serve on armed services, foreign affairs, or on the Intel Committee. Nonetheless, when foreign policy decisions come before me, take them very, very, very seriously. And if I don't know the information, I try to get the people in front of me that do know and glean as much information out of those folks as I can. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Senator Tester. So there are two ways you can ask your questions. There is a microphone standing there for those of you who want to stand. If you do not want or you cannot reach the microphone, there is a microphone here. Please raise your hand and we will bring the microphone to you. Please, any questions? Yes, right there. Andrea, right here, please. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking, Senator Tester. In reference to the Iran nuclear deal, shouldn't the Iraq War have taught us that our intelligent capabilities are inadequate at determining the presence of WMDs?
I don't think so. I mean, I think what happened after the weapons of mass destruction claim by Intel is that there was a lot of work. The Senate had, quite frankly, I wasn't the only one at those meetings. The Senate had many briefings by CIA and others on what was going on in Iran. And I think they knew what was going on fairly well. And let me give you an example of that. We had put sanctions on Iran since I've been in Congress, quite frankly. And Russia and China had never been on board. When Secretary of State Clinton was in that position, our intel showed that they had a nuclear facility at a place called Fordow. And we went to the Russians, and the Russians were absolutely shocked that this facility existed. They knew nothing of it. And so that's what got them on board. I think that we've been dealing with Iran since the Shah was there and before, but since the Shah from a opposition standpoint. And I feel solid that our intel on this was good, and so far it's borne itself out. But make no mistake about it, the IAEA does the inspections, but our intel is a very, very important, and our military, very, very important part of holding them true to the deal.
All right, thank you.
Fair question. Yes.
Brendan, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Tester, for coming out and
Thank you for
I think
having
for
me.
faithfully representing me in foreign policy decisions and
Yeah.
many other people I know. I'm an Arabic teacher here at the high schools, and in my classes we talk considerably, and this week in particular, about the impact of the oftentimes tumultuous relationship between America and the Arab world.
Yes.
And the way we've framed this week's discussion has been through the lens of America's interests and principles. Oftentimes the American principles we hold dear, democracy, autonomy, freedom, human rights, clash with alliances, interests we have, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt. I don't have to continue.
Gotcha.
So, being of the opinion that I think our senators should be able to answer the questions our high schoolers do, I'll just give you the.
I don't know. I don't know that I'm smarter than a third grader.
I don't know if I am either. I'll just give you the question I gave my students. What do you think is the appropriate balance to strike between long-term principles and short-term interests?
Well, that's wow. I don't know that I'm going to get home today. I think the foundations of this country can still be looked at as the foundations how we expect other people to be treated, to have civil liberties and freedom and with the forefathers, the right to be happy, not enslaved, not indentured. And it is true that a democracy doesn't work unless you have an educated society. I believe in that firmly. So there could be some adaptations made there, but I still think it's based on maximum freedom for the population. And that hasn't necessarily been the case in many spots around the world. Countries' leadership could have done better. We could have done better here too in that regard in some instances, but short and long term are two different things. And I talked about what Mansfield said is you can't be the world's cop. And so I think you need to find ways that you can maximize the leadership that has values similar, if not identical, to ours, if you can find them. And I don't know you do that by starting out shooting guns. Look, there's times when violence has to probably happen. But the fact is the first step, it's not the right direction to go. We should do everything we can do to avoid war and try to empower people. And that's the way I would go into negotiations. And it's difficult. These folks have different values, and they have a different lifestyle than we do. I mean, I was in Iraq and Afghanistan a couple times since I've been elected to see what's going on over there. I mean, it's a tough, tough, tough area. It's not like my farm, I will tell you that, in north central Montana. It's far different from it. So we also need to consider the challenges that they have and not assume that they have challenges that are the same as ours. They may have different ones. And that's why it's really important that you get people who know what's going on. This ISIS thing drives me crazy. Drives me crazy. I mean, how can you have the kind of violence that's going on out there and hurting kids, families, and all this stuff? But I don't know that we've really sat down as a country, and maybe we have, and maybe I'm just not given benefit, and asked ourselves, why? Why is this happening? Is it, some will tell you it's because of global climate change. Some will tell you it's because, these people don't have anything to look forward to, so they're willing to do anything. They're hungry. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons out there, but there's people smarter than me that probably know why it's going on, and we ought to figure out ways to figure out how to stop that, because it gets really frustrating figuring out how to stop an outfit like. And by the way, we've cut them back. Over the last 6 months, we've notched those guys back big time, but they're still around. Take a look at Brussels yesterday or day before yesterday. So we've got work to do. I probably didn't answer your question, but I did that intentionally.
I appreciate the answer, and thank you for
Yeah.
thanks for taking your job thoughtfully. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Please.
We tend to discuss the Iran deal from the perspective of those of us who live in the United States. I wonder if you might take a few minutes to describe the perspectives and the motivations of the other signatories to the agreement.
Yeah. Well, I think that if you take a look at, let me back up, and if you take a look at China and Russia and people in Europe, they wanted to do business with Iran. They wanted to do business with Iran. We had a moment in time to do this deal. I don't know, moving forward, where we'd have had the world community. If we'd have backed out of this thing, the world community would have said, we're in, too bad. So from that, there was a moment in time to get this deal done, and the deal got done in that moment in time. So part of their perspective is they've got stuff we want, they want stuff we got, so we'll do that. The other side, and I can't speak to what exactly Great Britain or France or Germany was thinking as it goes, but I can tell you that what they were probably thinking is similar to what we were thinking. I can't speak for Russia and China, and that is that if in fact this thing works, you don't have an Iran that has a nuclear weapon 2 or 3 months out, and by the way, it's a heck of a lot closer to Europe than it is here, even though it impacts the world. They would say that's a positive thing. They would say that a lot of these folks, and I've heard this from many of the experts, and it'd be interesting to know if any of your experts would say the same thing, say that this generation wants to be westernized. They want to move forward with a sound economy. They don't want to be they don't want to be held as the government's held them over the last 35 years. And I am sure that the folks in Europe also said, if we can get Iran to moderate, that's good for the whole Middle East, because they're a big kahuna in that group. And if we can get them to moderate, I think it helps moderate the whole thing. Now, the folks on the other side, the folks potentially that were opposed to the agreement, look, Israel was opposed to the agreement. They were opposed to it because they were concerned. And by the way, I think they had a reasonable fear. Iran hasn't exactly been a good actor in that region. And they were concerned that somewhere between $50 and $150 billion of their assets that would be unfrozen would be used to blow up them. And they were concerned about that. But I think that they had two reasons: economic and stability, as far as the other folks in the P5+1. But I've never talked to the ambassador. Those are folks I didn't talk to on this. But that's my hunch.
Next question.
So I've got one about a strategic pivot I'm hearing about going on in Washington towards China. And the question I've got is there the potential for, at least seen in the terms of Senate, watching for the potential of mission creep of a war on terror becoming battlegrounds of a war on terror becoming battlegrounds of a second Cold War, as China's new Silk Road intends to push west through places like Afghanistan? What is your opinion on that? Have you heard anything about it in the Senate or anything like that?
You think so? Let me boil your question down. So, I think I heard what you said. Do you think that we're going to get in conflict because of their influence in Afghanistan?
I'm basically
Okay.
saying, is there potential
Yeah.
that the Afghan conflict is going
Look,
to extend?
Yeah, look, I just had a nice visit with Max a week ago today, as a matter of fact. He was in D.C., and I had a conversation with him, and he talked about how aggressive China has been recently, and they have been very, very aggressive. And his opinion is that you need to balance that aggressiveness with equal aggressiveness on our part. Does that mean you put people on the ground and start shooting one another? No. But you do need to make sure that the conversation is, the avenue's there to open up conversation and make sure that they know what's inappropriate and what we'll stand for and what we don't. And I think that's I have not heard any pivot in the Senate as far as what we're going to do with China that would be any different than what we've done for the last 10, 15 years. Okay?
Hello. Thank you very much for your brief talk, Senator. I am considered to be somewhat of an expert on Syria, so my question will focus on that.
I'm hosed.
You know, the current policy of the White House and administration has been one of minimal involvement and potential containment, or the dream that this is somehow all containable. In my conversations with members of the administration, they've always emphasized that. And this all stems from the idea that you also brought up that actions have consequences and we need to be careful. But does that not also bring the idea that inaction also has consequences?
Yes.
And in this case, the inaction of not doing anything has brought us to where we are today. Look at Europe. That is just one example of the fact that such a conflict is uncontainable and has spread across. How would you feel
Okay,
about
so
where
you're
we
going to
are
have
now?
to tell me which conflict you're talking about. Are you talking about the civil war with Assad? Or are you talking about ISIS? Or are you
I'm talking-
talking about the
well,
refugees that are leaving?
Well, they're all a byproduct of one and the same. They're a byproduct of
Right.
Assad's policies that has led to the emergence of ISIS, obviously the catastrophic humanitarian disaster with the refugees and everything. It all comes back to that one point, and our failure to address that point. Had we addressed it 5 years ago, we would not necessarily be where we are now. That would be my opinion, but how do you feel about that?
Well, I would say this, that it wasn't 5 years ago, but it was probably 4. The president was talking about putting troops on the ground in Syria. I thought that was a bad choice, and I told him I wouldn't support him in it. I think it is critically important, and don't think this is a cop-out on the Americans' part. We support with air cover, we support in a lot of different ways. But it's critical that we do not make these wars East versus West. I think if we do that, we're in trouble. And so I think it's really important that the countries in the region, that we support them, and we have. We supported the Jordans and the Turks and others, to make sure that we do what we can do. Now, you've got also Russia, who just pulled out of this, is my understanding. but they are also meddling in that for whatever reasons, good or bad, probably bad. But the bottom line is that I'll just tell you, I think we need to rethink our policies on the Middle East and what we're doing there and how we can help stabilize that region and not add more conflict to that region. I talked about Iraq. I think that it would be interesting to see what that region would be like now if we had not went into Iraq in 2003. It would be interesting. No, it's not that's, but it would be interesting to see. It maybe could be worse, but I can't imagine how. And it seems like, things are happening all over that region with Libya and Yemen, and I mean, it just seems like it's total craziness. Now, you know more about that area than I do, and I yield to people who have been there, done that, and can tell me what we need to do to help stabilize that region. Because quite frankly, I don't have a lot of answers. And I don't see an end to what's going on in Syria right now. And we got folks that are being radicalized right and left across this country. We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars on our national security. And if you've flown lately, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's just the beginning of what you can't see that's going on out there. Yeah. Yes.
I have been told by the senator's office that we can only take one more question,
And this girl had her hand up.
so we have that. And yes,
Yeah,
please.
so here's the deal.
Yes.
You run for office. You get to be the senior senator, and 30-year-old people tell you what to do. Yeah. Be 31 tomorrow, right, Marlene? Go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you for coming and speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Most of the global economies are becoming more and more connected.
Yes.
As this happens, how do you think we can protect our economy
Yes.
against poor economic decisions in other areas of the world?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think if you take a look at the economies around the country that are shattered, their natural resource base is gone. I mean, they've trashed their water, they've trashed their soils, and so we've got to make sure we don't do that. So air and water, soil, those natural resources are really, really important. We keep that base there. And then I think you have to look at trade agreements as if they're fair. And I don't mean that to get into a debate on trade. I'm a farmer. I mean, agriculture ships a lot of grain east and west and out of this country. And so trade is very, very important. But all that being said, they have to be fair. I don't know this for a fact, but I was told that the last trade agreement we signed before I got in the Senate is one of the reasons why we have an immigration problem today, because the Mexican farmers were put out of business. I'm a farmer. I want to stay in business. But I'm telling you, if I was starving to death and Canada was doing real good, I'd be hiking across the line too. It's a natural thing to do. So I just think that we need to take a look at trade agreements, how they impact us, make sure they're fair. If Byron Dorgan was up here, he'd tell you how many cars are coming into this country and how many cars we're sending over there, and it's not an even swap. But maybe it's made up for somewhere else in the trade agreement. And so I think that's the key. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I'm going to go off script here a lot here. We just came from CFAC, okay? It's a site that needs to be cleaned up in Columbia Falls. It's a worldwide company that runs that. One of the reasons I was told when it shut down in 2009 was because they could do business in a foreign country a lot easier because there wasn't the environmental restrictions. Well, if that's the case, that's really too bad, because this world is getting smaller, and ultimately that will impact us going down the line too. But we need to make sure those trade agreements have good wages for their people who we're making them with. They're fair wages. They're not poverty wages. They're not driving people into poverty. Make sure that there are environmental rules in place to make those fair, because quite frankly, it impacts us all, and move from there. And if they're not, then I think you renegotiate a better deal. So that's my perspective. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you very much, Senator.